This is Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body with Dr. Schuyler. Discover how your thoughts manifest disease and what you can do about it. Here's your host, Dr. Schuyler.
Hi, Dr. Schuyler. Welcome back to Heal Your Mind, Heal Your Body. Today I'm talking about a really interesting topic. It's called chronic invalidation. And what exactly is chronic invalidation and how it impacts the mind-body connection, how it impacts anxiety, trauma, GI issues, autoimmune disease. So the Journal of Trauma and Dissociation came out with a study saying chronic invalidation leads to GI discomfort, GI pain, GI disorders, fatigue, overall pain, and heart problems. So chronic invalidation can be found in our personal relationships and our work relationships, social media, as well as medical. So, and at school. So what we're looking at today is what exactly is chronic invalidation, and then how many areas in your life are you experiencing chronic invalidation? So what is invalidation chronically? It's when over a period of time, someone habitually dismisses your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences. Sometimes they just outright ignore them. So there's a difference here. There is something that we do often invalidate people inadvertently. Hey, look at that bird. Yeah, nice bird. That just kind of happens and that's normal. But what we're talking about here is chronic invalidation, where it's a pattern. When you go to speak your emotions and you're met with contempt, or you're dismissed, or you're attacked, or you're argued with. And there's different ways that we can experience this, whether it be through the medical field, social invalidation, through our partner, even through work. But what's happening is if it's chronically, it's done over a period of time when you begin to feel, when you go to speak, that's going to be met with resistance. So over time, you begin to mute how you feel and get fearful how you're going to speak. And you begin to experience this distance from self, this denial of self, this denial of truth. So what chronic invalidation does over time, especially from a partner, that you begin to experience self-doubt, increased anxiety, depression, more automatic negative thoughts, core beliefs that you're not good enough, you're not lovable. So when someone is chronically invalidating you, begin to have a stress response. You begin to have a change in your biometrics. You begin to experience these somatic effects. Because we are human beings that are emotional beings that happen to think. And if you go back to episode 1, you see how much I talk about how emotions as a glue that binds the mind to the body. So if we're in a chronic state of stress from being emotionally invalidated from our partner, our loved one, or significant others, that begins to have a dis-ease process in the body. And I like to describe it this way, and I saw this somewhere else. It's not my story, but it's a story that I saw. And if, let's say, it's evening time and you want to go for a swim and you're at the beach, and it says, no swimming past 5 p.m., no lifeguard on duty. And you go ahead and go swimming anyways. And you get caught up in a rip current. Like, help, I'm drowning, save me. And your partner begins to argue with you. Well, it's your fault you went swimming. It's past 5 p.m. There's no lifeguard on duty. That's your fault. You'll have to figure it out. It's not my problem you're drowning. It's almost as if they're blaming you for your experience. Whether you should have gone in the water or not, it's irrelevant. When you're experiencing emotional pain and you're asking for help and someone dismisses you, someone avoids the topic, or they argue with you or they attack you for having an emotion on a habitual chronic basis, this leads to increased anxiety, decrease in the sense of self-worth, and increase in doubt. So stonewalling and silent treatment is a very extreme form of chronic invalidation, which is unfortunately is very common nowadays. So this actually causes disturbances in the brain. Chronic invalidation and stonewalling impacts the hippocampal volume. Chronic invalidation, stonewalling, dismissing other people's feelings, emotions, experiences also impacts the same part of the brain where we feel physical pain. So when our emotions are dismissed or invalidated, we literally feel emotional pain and physical pain simultaneously. It's hitting the same part of the brain. This is how important chronic invalidation is to the immune response, to GI disorders, to anxiety. If you're around someone that chronically invalidates you and you do have an autoimmune or increased anxiety or GI disorders, this is something really to take a look at and think about. And I like to think of it like excuse me, like a double scoops of ice cream. When our feelings are chronically invalidated, we begin to doubt ourselves. Wait, am I the problem? Like Taylor Swift's song, wait, it's me, I'm the problem. You start kind of wondering what's going on here. And you start to abandon yourself in order to fit their paradigm that they're selling you. Because oftentimes people who are experiencing chronic invalidation will shift their truth, will shift their reality in order to fit the other person so they're copacetic. It's a form of people pleasing. It becomes like a fawn response where you shift into this state of survival that you will begin to people please just to experience some form of validation. But when you do this, you begin to abandon self. And abandonment of self gets you further and further and further away from your own truth. Think of it this way. You have self-abandonment through chronic invalidation. You begin to people please. You begin to abandon your truth. What that looks like is you're pulling yourself. You're abandoning yourself. You're people pleasing more. You're abandoning your truth. The distance between the self-abandonment and your truth is the amount of safety that you're lacking in your life. And lack of safety increases disease responses. And we know this, and we'll get into this in vagal tone in a minute. So when people do acts such as a silent treatment or stonewalling, it's a very dismissive way of invalidating your existence, letting you know that you're not important, you're not valuable, you're not worth my time, energy, or effort. And when we perceive that as humans, empathetic humans, that's a very painful process to go through. And when we go through intense emotional pain, our stress goes up, our anxiety goes up, and our body is a mirror of our mind. So if our minds begin to feel invalidated, unloved, we start creating these automatic negative thoughts. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. They aren't even talking to me. What have I done wrong? What could I do different? Your self-esteem begins to tank. Your disease process begins to increase. So oftentimes when I work with people and they're in a situation, they're being chronically invalidated and they have these automatic negative thoughts. And we talked about this in a previous episode, how we have typically with the disease process, roughly 30 to 40,000 negative thoughts. So if you're getting this message that you aren't good enough, you're not worth my time, effort, or energy to even validate your basic human experience, that you're drowning in emotional pain. If you've ever cried and no one paid attention, or you go to say, hey, I'm in a lot of pain right now. I can't walk today. Oh yeah, you're fine. Or my heart's really bothering me. Yeah, you're fine. When someone just continues to do this, you begin to then question your own worth and have more and more of these automatic negative thoughts. And I want to introduce an antidote to automatic negative thoughts. The antidote of ALTs. Automatic loving thoughts. What would the world look like if we had 30 to 40,000 automatic loving thoughts every single day? How different would we be if we raised our children to have automatic loving thoughts? So much we're talking about ants and automatic negative thoughts, how it impacts the disease process. So I'm going to challenge you today, as I challenge myself, to start thinking about what automatic loving thoughts feel safe and okay to start today. So if you're in a place or space where you're receiving chronic invalidation, and we talked about the previous episode, putting like a cake dome over you and protecting yourself from bad vibes because they're so contagious. And words lie, but biometrics don't. So if you're feeling your biometrics go off, your GI becoming immobilized, your heart rate going to go up, you're beginning to sweat, you're beginning to notice headaches and chronic pain, your biometrics are telling you that something's wrong. And these automatic negative thoughts from chronic invalidation is speeding the disease process. Trauma is not what happens to us. It's how our body stores the memory. So if you're receiving chronic invalidation, you can begin to store trauma in your cells. Repressed, unexpressed emotion, repressed anger, repressed rage. And what I've noticed with people who have chronically invalidating parents or chronically invalidating partners is they have a lot of that self-abandonment. And think of that double scoop. We resent someone for dismissing our emotions, and then we begin to self-abandon ourselves, and we begin to experience resentment for ourselves. You have that double scoop. I resent you for dismissing my emotions. Now I resent me for not using my voice. I resent me for not speaking my voice, my truth. I'm getting further and further from my own sense of safety. And then it turns, I've seen autoimmune, oftentimes it turns into intense rage and anger, resentment at others and resentment at self that's unexpressed. So this sense, this concept, these ants, I'm so mad, I'm so angry. When you feel you're not lovable, not worthy of someone's time, attention, and energy, they're going to chronically dismiss you. You begin to experience, am I even lovable? Well, I kind of may even begin to loathe myself or not like myself. And then you overcompensate with the people pleasing. You can see how it's this kind of vicious cycle of chronic invalidation, challenging your core beliefs, creating the sense of distance from our safety, distance from our truth. Switching to this people-pleasing, denying ourselves. And the more we deny our truth, the more we deny our own voices, the more we begin to empower those who are chronically invalidating us. And the reason I bring up safety is I did a study a few years ago, and what we had found was with our participants, when we increased their level of safety, their GI symptoms went down. Their IBS and their dyspepsia, their abdominal pain, their symptoms reduced. With an increased sense of safety, GI symptoms go down in my study. We already know this through vagal tone activity. So our vagal tone is responsible for a physiological emotional regulation. So what happens when we're chronically invalidated? Our vagal tone begins to drop. And the vagal tone is this indirect way of measuring our vagus nerve. And remember we talked about before, our vagus nerve is what connects the mind all the way, the brain actually, all the way down to the gut, and it innervates and infiltrates parts of the systems and the organs. So when we have a low vagal tone from increased stress, anxiety, chronic invalidation, this is where the disease response begins to happen. So you have chronic invalidation, increases anxiety, decreases a sense of self-efficacy, increases self-doubt, decreases vagal tone. Vagal tone has a direct impact on our disease and wellness process. High vagal tone is a rest and digest state. A low vagal tone is a fight, flight, or flight state. So if you're experiencing a low vagal tone, you're either in a fight or flight state. If it's prolonged, you go into a frozen state. So the chronic invalidation that we get from our partners, this is very interesting. Partners that do chronic invalidation are often parents that do chronic invalidation. So let's move into parent invalidation, attachment styles. And attachment styles will be the next podcast. But what happens as parents when we chronically invalidate our children? Or if you're like me, and I'll totally date myself, I'll give you something to cry about. Heard that a couple hundred times a year, I'm sure. Love my dad, but that's his favorite thing to say is, I'll give you something to cry about. So that's actually a form of invalidation. And if you're anywhere in the age range that I'm in, that's just how we grew up. You have to be broken or bleeding in two to actually get some sort of attention. And that was normal back in my generation. But what we're looking at now is we now have studies that this chronic invalidation, especially from parental attachment styles, does lead to disease. Oftentimes I work with a lot of pediatric patients and the parents say, well, she shouldn't be depressed. She shouldn't be anxious, or he shouldn't have a problem. He's got everything he wants. My children are so ungrateful and they're so entitled. Those might be true. Maybe they shouldn't feel depressed. Maybe they are entitled. I don't know. Maybe they should feel grateful. I don't know. But they still feel depressed. So both realities, both truths can exist simultaneously. But as parents, we tell your children they're crying, oh my gosh, Susie ate my lunch at school. I don't know. Well, you shouldn't feel sad. But I do feel sad. But you shouldn't feel sad. You went ahead and got lunch anyways. When we tell people we shouldn't feel something, we're usurping their power as humans to have a human experience. Whether you think they should have that emotion or not is irrelevant. That's their truth. So I might not agree with my kid having a freak out over something, but she's still having a freak out. And I'm thinking, wow, she shouldn't be crying over this. This doesn't make sense. But it makes sense to her. So what I've noticed working with a lot of pediatric patients who have IBS and GI disorders and even autoimmune, that they're often reporting, my parents tell me I shouldn't feel this way, but I do feel this way. What's that creating? Self-doubt. The mind-body connections start to separate. And if we start telling our children, oh, you shouldn't feel this way at age 3. Don't cry. You don't have to cry about. They begin to separate what they know to be true. We are human beings that happen to think. We are human beings that happen to think. We are feeling beings. When we're hungry, we feel hungry. When we're thirsty, we feel thirsty. We cut our finger, we feel the pain. We break our arm, we feel the pain. Then we happen to think. So we ask someone they shouldn't feel something, or that's not important, or logically doesn't make sense. You're asking that person to disconnect what makes us human beings that feel. And that disconnect creates that sense of self-abandonment. So now we're back even the same repetitive process, parent to child, denying, dismissing. So it does not have to be the extreme, like a stonewalling partner or even boss or coworker. It doesn't have to be that extreme. It can be as subtle as saying to your 5-year-old, well, you shouldn't cry. You just fell off your bike. It's okay. Big boys don't cry. And validation, subtle, with the most beautiful intent as parents, because we don't want our children hurt. So we're like, hurry up, don't hurt. Let me tell you how you shouldn't feel. Beautiful intentions, nothing maladaptive about it. It's just how we're communicating. I want to bring awareness to that chronic invalidation even happens in the most sweet, benign ways that we never even expect that happens. It doesn't have to be some abusive, toxic relationship. It's something as simple as, oh, honey, you shouldn't feel that way. It's okay. That's invalidation in its purest loving form. But think about over the years, starting age 3, you have better comprehension of the human language, and you're told you shouldn't feel a certain way. You begin to lose this sense of self-efficacy, the sense that you can't get anything right. Well, if I shouldn't feel this way and I do feel this way, it means I can't get anything right. And you often see anxiety as comorbidity with GI disorders and autoimmune and depression. And when we abandon ourselves and our truth because we shouldn't feel a way, we create an increased sense of lack of safety. A lack of safety within creates disease. And the only place safety can be created after a certain age is internally. But it's our job as parents to create an internal sense of safety within our children, to begin to model for our children what safety looks like. Another form we're going to shift to is social media. It's like one of my favorite topics, talking about social media. It's like this digital age of invalidation. So when you think about, I think of my teenage daughters going to post a pic and someone doesn't like it, and I get to hear about it all night long. She didn't like my pic. She didn't post me. Invalidation. Think about the dopamine hit every time you go to log on to Instagram or TikTok and someone's liked your video and you get this hit, this dopamine hit. But one day you go there, it's not there. And you begin to question, no one likes me? Does anyone like me? No one liked my photo. And these ants start creeping in again. Social media is one of the number one ways that we can feel chronically invalidated. And people can have thousands of friends online, thousands of places to talk to online, but not have a single human connection to hug that day. And that's a form of emotional chronic invalidation. Now, it's not like the extreme partner invalidation. It's a form of repetitive seeking dopamine hits, getting invalidated when you don't get it. So this digital age of chronic invalidation really has skyrocketed anxiety and depression and even suicide ideation. So when you begin to think about all these ways that the mind-body is connected through chronic invalidation, you've got your partner, you've got social media, you can have work, you can have parents. Let's say you're at work and you do a really good act, a really good job at work, an attaboy, attagirl, and no one says anything. You then begin to doubt your self-worth. So if we look at all the areas that we going to experience as chronic invalidation, it really begins to add up. Now I want to get into medical invalidation. And even to get into this, I'm going to get nice and comfy because I got a story to tell you guys. How I came to learn about medical invalidation was through my own experience in 2002, and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now, before I get into the story, listen, all doctors don't chronically invalidate. I just happen to have a humdinger of one. I work with many brilliant physicians at Arnold Palmer that make a point to validate the person's brain gut disorder issues. I'm just going to isolate this one experience, and maybe you guys might relate to it. So I was diagnosed in 2002, and I was, I think, put in the ICU. I was really in and out of consciousness, and I was training to be a professional boxer back then. Yeah, looks can be deceiving. I was training at Sugar Ray Leonard's gym, actually, and I was probably training 4 to 6 hours a day in Las Vegas, really trying to make my mark as a boxer. And I became very, very sick and was rushed to the hospital by my kid's dad. And I kind of came to, and I was convulsing and shaking uncontrollably. I don't remember much, but I just remember I really couldn't think much. And I remember just having these really odd convulsions. And I come to, and this neurologist is sitting next to my bedside, and he goes, I don't even mind my words when I say this. Stop faking it, you fudgicle little girl. That's just the most polite way I can put it. I didn't even know what to think or feel. I just had, not only was he a neurologist, but he was also a PhD in psychology. And I wasn't a PhD back then. I thought, love of God, I'm 27 years old. Am I faking this? Like, am I scared to get in the boxing ring or something? Like, am I faking this? I began to experience so much self-doubt. I was embarrassed, and I was so full of shame. I was so ashamed. Did I create this? And then he accused me of being a cutter. Now, y'all, back in 2002, we didn't have cutters. We don't know what cutting. I had to ask a nurse, what is a cutter? She's like, well, that's when you cut yourself to bleed out. And I'm like, search my body. I'm not a cutter. So now I'm defending myself. I'm having this response. I'm really, really sick. I'm in and out of consciousness. And I'm having to have a nurse examine me to prove I'm not a cutter. And I was a fudgicle little girl that was faking it all. So I asked to speak to the advisory board and dismissed, blah, blah, blah. I finally get a new position in. Oof, easy as pie to figure out what was wrong. Did an MRI, ran a lumbar puncture, and had multiple sclerosis. It was clear as day. I had my answer. I knew it was wrong. I went into these convulsions, these seizures, because I was training so hard, I'd lost so much blood. I had to have 3 IV bags of blood. And that's just the power of the mind, by the way. I was supposed to be able to walk around, but I'm still training 6 hours a day with no blood in me. But we'll get into the power of the mind later and how I healed myself that way. But right now it's about medical invalidation. So qualitative studies do show that chronic invalidation through medical professionals, despite all the amazing ones out there, it can increase mental health distress, and it can increase symptoms. And there's 2 ways that it comes out. It's the same way that it comes out as partners as well. When we're chronically invalidated by the medical world out there, we begin to internalize our symptoms. We don't want to speak about what's happening. We want to take our emotions because we're being invalidated, and we don't want to talk about it. We internalize our pain, our emotional pain, our physical pain. Then the other way it happens, we become hyper-independent. And this is my go-to one. If I feel invalidated, I go to hyper-independence. Hyper-independence and how it looks in the medical field is you stop going to doctor's appointments. You stop telling them what's wrong. And your symptoms may get worse as a result because you're too scared to talk about your emotions because you might be invalidated, told that you're wrong. And a good example of this, and it's a benign example, and I really want to point out, I'm not position bashing because there's so many beautiful, brilliant ones out there. And this is something that I deem to their own fault. The pain scale. Well, give me a scale rating from 1 to 10. It's so subjective. And oftentimes I've heard stories. I went to the doctor and I said my pain was so bad, I couldn't, I could barely walk. And the physician will say, well, you walked in here today and you're talking, your pain must not be that bad. Well, what happens with chronic widespread pain or fibromyalgia or any sort of autoimmune or GI disorder, we learn to operate because we have to. So we learn to walk in pain. Your threshold gets higher and higher and higher. So we learn to function more. So it looks more like we're faking it and invalidating it. So another example with the pain scale is, well, how high is your pain scale? Well, it's a 10. And I heard the story of the physician saying, so it's you broke your arm, it's unbearable? Well, it could be a 10 that day if you broke your arm. But what if the next day you got hit by a car and you broke 15 bones? It's a different 10. So this is to the physician's defense. There's really not a good mechanism. There's a different pain scale that can be used, but what's traditionally used is not a really valid mechanism for people to report their pain that the physicians can hear them accurately. And I also want to point out, physicians are not trained in mental health. They're not. They're looking to solve the problem to help you feel better. So if you're feeling invalidated, try this. Try communicating with your physician. Hey, I'm feeling a little invalidated, or I'm feeling maybe I'm not being heard. Can we communicate on a little different level on this? Or we've tried that before, that didn't work, can we try another option? Don't automatically assume that they're intentionally invalidating you. You may feel invalidated, yes, but this is a place and space, a chance you can use your words. Hey, I'd like a second opinion. And for the worst case scenarios, for those that get told the horrible things I was told, yeah, seek validation somewhere else and just dismiss that person from your life. Absolutely dismiss that position, boop, and move on, because the next position that walked into my life, she was a game changer. I felt so heard, so validated, so taken care of, and she put me on the road of getting better. She validated me. And validation from the medical community goes a long way in the healing process. So you think about chronic invalidation and the qualitative studies on medical invalidation, the studies on invalidation on heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune, GI. Look at all these areas, how it impacts our vagal tone. And look at work, social media, partners, parents, how we grew up as children, all these things add up into the mind-body connection that begins to create a separation from self. The more that we're told, the more that we experience, you shouldn't feel that way. You're not important to me. What you have to say is not important. I'm going to let you drown your own emotional pain. Or you shouldn't feel upset. We give you everything. You should feel grateful. Little subtle nuances that over time begin to make a really big impact on our health and disease process. And you talk about in the past episodes, we talked about emotions. Think how big of a part emotions play in our health and disease process. We talked about the limbic response. So if you look at it now, the limbic response, if you feel chronically invalidated, low vagal tone, you're going into a fight or flight response. And we'll talk about the frozen response in their episode, because that's a really cool ball of wax to kind of examine. I really like getting into the frozen response. And we looked at healing phases. Think about if you're constantly being told that you were wrong and validated. Wouldn't you begin to feel like a victim? I would. I did. I have. So if you read the previous episodes about healing phases, martyr, victim, and if someone is in a victim energy phase of their life, whether it be disease or just in general, we have phases, whether martyr, victim, thriver, survivor. Ask yourself, what areas are they being chronically invalidated in? Or what areas are you yourself being chronically invalidated in where you feel like a victim? And how significant feeling like a victim is to the disease wellness process. Can you take, we talked about in the first episode, you take this mind-body pie and you take this slice of it. And we had emotions, limbic, attachment styles we'll get into. Emotions are contagious. All these different ingredients that are in there, now you have chronic invalidation. So as we start pulling in all these puzzle pieces, what's creating the mind-body connection disease process? It's things that we don't even think about. Just being invalidated by something like you shouldn't feel that way causes a stress response. If it's done chronically, it's self-abandonment. Self-abandonment leads to lack of safety. Lack of safety leads to poor vagal tone. Poor vagal tone leads to disease. It's this really cool new way of looking at the mind-body connection, the disease process, that's not really being talked about. So what I'm going to ask you to do today is to, with curious objectivity, take a look at your life. And if you have an autoimmune or GI disorder, is there any areas of your life where you're feeling invalidated? Trauma, abuse, emotional neglect, adverse childhood experiences, rough childhoods, are all linked to disease. Even if you're with lovingly telling a child you shouldn't feel that way, that adds up over time. And we'll get into the attachment style later. So as you begin to learn and take inventory of all these things that make up the mind-body connection, that influence the 30 trillion cells, the 80,000 thoughts a day, and each thought has an emotion tied to it. You have these particles, molecules of emotion coursing throughout the body. And if you're experiencing chronic invalidation, it's going to create disease. It's going to exacerbate disease. It's going to make your pain worse. So take inventory if you're in a situation like that. And I like to say, we cannot be healed in the same place we're being harmed. We cannot heal in the same place we're being harmed. Whether it's work, school, partner, the way you grew up, social media. Take inventory without judgment. Are there areas in your life that you're trying to heal, but you're still actively being harmed? If you go to my website, drskyler.net, I will have monthly newsletters as well as tips, information, and free downloads, some really kind of juicy stuff, because I do have a book coming out. And it's so fascinating. I was talking with David, who's helping me develop the book, and we were starting to realize that this book is called Empower Your Child to Heal. But what we're realizing is it's almost two books being written at once. Because what's in this book talks about attachment styles, chronic invalidation, epigenetic transmission of trauma, emotions are contagious. It gets into all these things that anyone who has an autoimmune disorder or a GI disorder or anxiety is experiencing. It's like this culmination of all the puzzle pieces that make one big puzzle of the mind-body connection. So anyways, shameless plug. If you go to drskyler.net, you'll get free tips and downloads and hopefully a second book coming out with the first book, Empower Your Child to Heal. And it goes over the 8 ways that with this mind-body connection, you begin to empower your child how to heal. I want to thank you guys for, taking the time to listen to this and really begin to learn what we can do differently to begin to heal ourselves. If I can be in a wheelchair, going blind, told I'd be dead by this age, at the beautiful ripe age of 51, and I'm not. As you can tell, I'm sick crisscross applesauce half the time, that there is a way around it. And through this podcast, I really hope, and it's my goal, to begin to teach you guys all the ways that the disease process happens that no one's talking about and no one teaches us. And as sick as I was, back in the day, to be at optimal wellness and optimal health, it's possible. Keep listening, keep trying. Look at areas in your life where you may be getting harmed. Look at areas in your life where maybe you have an automatic negative thoughts, and begin to challenge yourself. How can I begin to have automatic loving thoughts? Next episode, I'll be talking about attachment style and how that impacts the disease wellness process. I wish you guys abundant blessings. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I feel so grateful you have listened to the end. When we begin to understand how our body manifests stress, trauma, depression, anxiety, and even unexpressed emotions, we then create a space and bandwidth in our minds to begin to heal our bodies. Healing is a decision, and I am grateful for yours. Abundant blessings, Dr. Schuyler.
To learn more about the work Dr. Schuyler is doing, please visit drskyler.net. That's drskyler.net. And remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you like to listen.
Produced by Audavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.